regardless of how long you have lived outside Zimbabwe, whether it is 1 year or whether it is 10 years or 30 years, you still have a right to re-establish or to resettle yourself in Zimbabwe. It is a birthright. Today, we are going to be talking about one of the options that you can exercise, or one of the options that you can take advantage of when planning to return to Zimbabwe. And this is the option that is called returning resident permit. It's a process that I want to talk about today because I have been through that process myself. About a few years ago, I decided to go back to Zimbabwe and resettle there. And I went through the process. So engizabe ngikhuluma ngakho namhla is partly based on experience and partly based on additional information that I've come to gather over time. Now, ukuba yi-returning resident, some people may think, well, ngiyabe ngizibuyelela nje ekhaya, so, you know, what's the fuss? Why does it matter so much, how I, return to Zimbabwe? Why do I have to apply to return to Zimbabwe when I'm coming from another country? After all, I'm returning back to my own country. Well, you're right, you're returning to your own country, but it is important to do it in a way that puts you at an advantage. Do it smart. So today, I'm going to share with you some tips, some ideas of how to do it smart. And it is through this process. This is just one of the processes that you can engage. It's called a returning resident permit. The primary purpose of a returning resident permit is for you to take advantage of some duty or tax rebates and exemptions. Imali lezana bakucharge zona e-border nxa ungena le mpahla. Uthola impahla leyo ithenge ngemalini. How much did you buy your car? How much did you buy your sofas? And then they charge you how much duties on top of those, assets, or on top of that property. When you utilize the process of being a returning resident, you take advantage of being exempted from some of those charges, or from some of those taxes or duties or fees, whichever way you look at it. So today I want to talk about how you can qualify yourself to be a returning resident applicant if you have been living outside Zimbabwe for a long period of time. First of all, I want to define what they look at when they talk about long period of time in terms of your qualification of having been outside Zimbabwe. Kutsho ukuthi wasuke eZimbabwe wayahlala ngaphandle kwelizwe for at least a minimum of 2 years. Could be more depending on the on the discretion of the immigration official, but the standard is a minimum of 2 years that you should have lived outside Zimbabwe. Ukuthi first and foremost to qualify ukuthi uphenduke ekhaya usebenzisa indlela le ebizwa ngokuthi returning resident process. Now, what is the most basic qualification besides ukuhlala ngaphandle? It is that you must be a Zimbabwean, because obviously you are a Zimbabwean returning to Zimbabwe because you want to go and stay there again. You want to go back and live there. If you're a foreigner, you can't take advantage of this process. If you're not a Zimbabwean, in other words, you can't take advantage of this process. You can only take advantage of it if you are a Zimbabwean citizen. You can be a Zimbabwean citizen by birth, or you can be a Zimbabwean citizen by descent. And in certain cases, you can be a Zimbabwean citizen through naturalization. Now, naturalization is the process where wangena eZimbabwe wasebenza khona through a work permit, or wahlala khona through a permanent residency process, and then eventually wahlala isikhathi esikunika imvumo yokuthi ugcine usuyi-citizen yeZimbabwe. Just like we also do it in other countries, ukuthi sifike kwamanye amazwe wafika lawe wasebenza wahlala khona iminyaka ethile, and then they eventually allow you to apply ukuba yi-citizen, and then you become a dual citizen with Zimbabwe. or you can be a citizen of Zimbabwe through descent. Now, citizen of Zimbabwe through descent, accent through descent, it means ukuthi uthatha ama-rights akho kumbe amalungelo akho okuba ngumZimbabwean based on your parents, based on your heritage. Therefore, you are returning to live in Zimbabwe based on your heritage, based on the fact that your parents are Zimbabwean. So abantwana bethu laba esibazala ngaphandle kwelizwe bayakwanisa ukuthi babuyele eZimbabwe using this process, because technically they are Zimbabweans and by right they are Zimbabweans. And then kukhona njalo ukuthi ube ngumZimbabwean, which is the natural process by birth, meaning ukuthi wena wazalelwa khona eZimbabwe. Those are the primary ways in which you can be a Zimbabwean, and the primary ways in which you then would qualify to apply for a returning residence permit lay. But also, regardless, to qualify, to apply for a permit lay, ubuyele eZimbabwe as a permanent resident or as a returning resident, you must prove that you have been living outside Zimbabwe for the minimum of 2 years. The maximum doesn't matter, but for the minimum at least of 2 years. And how do you prove that? The documentation, the paper trail, the exit and the entry stamps as dindwaku passport yako. Those exit and entry stamps that are stamped on your passport or in your passport, those are what immigration officials will be looking at when they are looking at approving, or at considering you for a returning resident visa application. So they will look at things like, when did you leave Zimbabwe? Does it meet the minimum requirements in terms of the time frame that you have lived outside Zimbabwe since you last left? And not only is it just about when did you leave Zimbabwe, it is about when did you first return to Zimbabwe after you left. Because you could have left Zimbabwe, and then you stayed there. Maybe you stayed in another country for about 3 months. Then you came back to Zimbabwe again, 4 months. Then you went back again, 5 months. Then came back again, 1 month. That's not migrating or emigrating from Zimbabwe. That's just traveling outside Zimbabwe, back and forth between Zimbabwe and other countries. So you can't use that as a basis that you are now applying to be a returning resident to Zimbabwe because you have spent 3 or 4 months or 5 months of the year traveling to a different country outside Zimbabwe. Okay, so you need to be able to establish that you are actually living in another country with a full, status, with a full recognized status of multi-year residency in that country. It could be a multi-year study permit. It could be a work permit, multi-year work permit. It could be a permanent residency that you have for a foreign country, or it could be a citizenship that you have acquired in another country. And if it's a citizenship, obviously it means you are a dual citizen between, of that country and Zimbabwe as well. So those are some of the ways in which you're going to be proving that you actually were living outside the country. And then what they are going to be looking at in your passport, which comes to play in terms of how you have been living outside, is they are looking at your passport to see, like I said, I think briefly earlier, to see how many stamps are in your passport showing you returning to Zimbabwe from that country, to show that you are not just doing back and forth. Okay. And then once that is established, then there are other things that they are going to be looking at. And these are all things that I had to go through myself a few years back when I was applying for my own returning residency status in Zimbabwe. The other thing that they're going to be looking at is your establishment in that country, in that foreign country. Were you working? Were you running your own business? Ngaga to sebenza. They will expect you to present a letter of employment from where you are working. And if you were working and you have presented them with a letter of employment, at the same time, they will also expect you to present them with a letter showing that you quit or that you have given up that job because now you are returning to Zimbabwe. Because obviously they don't want a situation where, you say you have quit a job in the UK, or maybe where you say you were working in the UK, but now are coming back to Zimbabwe. And then when they say, show us an employment letter, you show them an employment letter. And then when they say, show us that you're actually leaving the UK and you're no longer working there, have the hospital where you were working or the place where you were working, have a letter, show us a letter that you wrote to them, confirming, from them as well, that they acknowledge that you quit the job. And then you say, no, I can't show you that. Then that means you could otherwise probably just be popping into Zimbabwe to bring your goods and then going back to your job again, whatever it is that you live in the foreign country. So they look into all of those things. And if you can't satisfy any of them, you cast doubt on your own case, and they may very well deny you the qualification for the status. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the advantage of this visa, the advantages of this permit of returning residents. Okay, the advantage why it is, why you probably would need it if you're planning to return to Zimbabwe, is that it helps you to return with your household goods, as well as to return with something like your vehicle, your car. Because remember, lezi izinto ozi accumulator, abroad or, in another country. Sihleze emazweni lapha silemizi lakhona nxa usufuna ukubuyela ekhaya ule mota yakho ulamasofa akho ule television yakho, you've got all sorts of movable goods that you have accumulated over 10, 15, 20 years that you have been living in South Africa or whichever country you're living in, and you don't want to be going back to Zimbabwe and leaving all those things behind or having to try and get rid of them somehow, if you can otherwise just relocate with them. And the easiest way to relocate with those goods is through applying for what is called a returning residence in Zimbabwe, because it allows you to come back home with all your goods that you have accumulated abroad. When it comes to the vehicle, they want to know that you have had that vehicle at least for a minimum of 6 months. If you haven't owned the vehicle for at least 6 months, then obviously it means maybe it's not your vehicle. You just bought it so that you can go back with it at home and sell it or something like that. They want to know that this is a vehicle that is actually your primary vehicle that you have been using wherever, in whichever country you've been living at. And also another pointer when it comes to a vehicle, and this one I was surprised in my case because they followed me up on it. When it comes to the vehicle, if you are going to be bringing a vehicle when returning to Zimbabwe, they will make sure that you are not intending to sell that vehicle within a 2-year period, 24 months. If you sell it, you will have big problems. And I'll tell you what happened in my case. I brought my vehicle in from, North America, which is where I was coming from. And literally about 18 or so months after I had arrived in Zimbabwe and settled in Zimbabwe, ZIMRA, Zimbabwe Revenue Agency, was knocking at my door. And they wanted literally to see my car. And I said to them, listen, you can go and look at it. It's in the garage. And they went back satisfied that I had not sold my car within that 2-year period. Because if I had sold it, they would have penalized me. They would have recalculated the value of that vehicle, and they would have gotten me to go back to their offices probably and pay all sorts of penalties and charges for having fraudulently or misled them in the manner in which I would have brought my vehicle intending to resell it. So it's a fact that you've got to be very careful about. So that being said, these are some of the tips that I wanted to give you today regarding if you have an intention to go back to Zimbabwe as a returning resident. It's a very good process that if you are planning to go home, please apply for it. And also, okunye ekusiza ngakho yukuthi, you know how like some of our passports, whether it's United Kingdom or it's American or Canadian and stuff like that, they attract entry fees. Now, figure Zimbabwe. If you are traveling to Zimbabwe casually, those passports, they attract entry fees. So once you get this visa stamped in your foreign passport, and you've been qualified for the returning resident permit, and your visa is stamped in your foreign passport, that means that even while you live in Zimbabwe, you can use that foreign passport to travel back and forth, from Zimbabwe to your neighboring countries or to wherever you're traveling, without being looked at as a foreigner when you enter Zimbabwe with your foreign passport, because now you're considered a permanent resident or somebody that is a Zimbabwean citizen but living permanently in Zimbabwe as well. Okay, so hey guys, remember this information I'm giving it to you. It's based on my personal experience. It's based on my personal knowledge. I'm not an immigration official, neither do I represent them. Please contact your local embassy. Please contact your local immigration offices for more details and more information. And if you have any other information in addition to share to what I've just shared with you now, please hit the comments, type it up in the comments, educate us, inform us, let us know what you think. If you like the channel, please subscribe to the channel, share this channel, hit the like buttons as well. And I hope to continue seeing you. Thank you so much for visiting the channel. Have a great day.